Hello, my name is Sam Stone, and my project is on the history of Canterbury.
Canterbury has been occupied since before the times of the Romans.
The city of Canterbury is located here, in Kent. In Roman times, the city was named due awareness. The location of this city was pretty much at the center of the modern city's location. You know, the Forum was pretty much in the location of the modern-day High Street. It had an amphitheater, it had a public bath. Many of the remains of these things can be found today, discovered after Nazi bombs destroyed buildings and cleared the earth. So they exposed this Roman construction. There are also 2 Roman baths that have been so far discovered in the city, one underneath the current Roman Museum in the city of Canterbury, and the other one is also under a bookstore. So that's quite a cool thing to find under a bookstore. Like, hey, wanna buy some books and look at some ruins? Sure. That's what I did. The city was destroyed by the Saxons in the 5th century. Hooray, Saxons! After the Saxons destroyed the city in the early 5th century, the name was lost to history, obviously. We didn't discover it for a few hundred years, and so 100 years later the Saxons built their own city there. They gave it an even sillier name. Canterbury. I can't even pronounce that. It means the township of the men of Kent. This brings us to King Ethelbert. King Ethelbert was a pagan, and he was married to a Christian named Bertha. Upon arrival of Augustine, whose mission was to convert all of Great Britain to Christianity, Bertha convinced Ethelbert to greet Augustine, and immediately Ethelbert was really taken by Augustine. He was converted to Christianity, and he gave Augustine land for an abbey and a cathedral to build in his city. This was the first cathedral that was built in Canterbury. It survived for about 400 years until it was burnt down in 1067. The Vikings sacked and burnt down the city in 839 and 850. It was sieged again in 1011. The Normans, when they invaded England in 1066, William the Conqueror placed a man by the name of Lanfranc as the Archbishop of Canterbury. He soon discovered that the entire city, as well as the cathedral, had been burnt down, so he built a new one. It took about 7 years before he already had a church, which is quite impressive for the time. This brings us to the murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket in 1170. Thomas Becket was appointed as the Archbishop by King Henry II because they were quite pally, they were good friends almost, and King Henry thought that he could trust Becket with the position. It would give him more control over the church. He immediately changed alliances. Instead of going along with King Henry and aligning himself with him, he aligned himself with the church. This enraged King Henry because now he doesn't have control over the church. Now, obviously, the king didn't actually kill Becket. The murder was orchestrated by 4 knights who wanted to try to please their king. So they traveled to Canterbury and they murdered him in his cathedral. This was followed by a series of miracles, supposedly, which leads us to pilgrims going there and praying. But the king was incredibly embarrassed after this. He indirectly murdered Thomas Becket. He traveled to the cathedral, at which point he was flogged by about 80 monks. In the 14th and 15th centuries, they rebuilt the walls around the city of Canterbury in the same place as the Romans' walls had been, including a new impressive set of gates, including the West Gate, which is still standing today. It's one of the prominent features when you're entering the city. The West Gate itself was still being built when the city was once again looted and burned by a man named Tyler Watt and his rebels. The wall was, however, much more successful in 1450 when Yorkist troops turned away at the sight of the walls of Canterbury. This leads us to Henry VIII, who in 1538 closed all of the monasteries and abbeys, taking all of their gold. He also destroyed the shrine for Thomas Becket and took all of its gold. In order to justify this, Henry declared Becket a traitor, and this caused all the pilgrims to stop coming to the city, and Canterbury lost a major source of its income. This wealth was eventually regained by the Huguenots, who were refugees from Flanders and settled into this city, introducing the textile industry. They fled after Queen Mary, a Catholic, rose to power in 1533. They returned after the ascension of Queen Elizabeth, which returned Protestantism. The city then slowly began to regain its wealth. This is because the Huguenots were also silversmiths, brewers, papermakers, and dentists from the Low Country. And at one point they even almost outnumbered the Englishmen in the city. When the English Civil War broke out, there were few supporters for Cromwell, but those who were supporters were usually poor. There was a small contingency of Roundheads in the city. They eventually took down a statue of Christ above the gate leading to the cathedral. Canterbury became very Puritan after that. The mayor even tried to outlaw Christmas in 1667. This obviously ended in a revolt, because people like Christmas. The Puritan era ended, however, in 1659 with the hanging of the mayor. Moving on to slightly more modern times, in 1787 and onwards, they made attempts to widen the roads of the city, in place for carriages, and a few hundred years later cars. This ended in the destruction of most of the gates in Canterbury, with the exception of the west. This ruined the medieval look of the city. The city became a market town with lots of shops. Later, when the French became a threat, the city became strategically important as it was near Dover, which is the closest link between France and the United Kingdom. At the end of the 18th century, over 5,000 troops occupied the city, once again ruining the look of it with its sprawling barracks and soldiers. The first passenger railway line was built between Whitstable and Canterbury. Whitstable is a nearby port city where a lot of my family lived. Canterbury was also host to the first train, which was the Invicta locomotive, which is now the motto of Kent. It means unvanquished, and you can see it here on the official emblem of Kent. Now on to World War II. On the 1st of June in 1942, the city was bombed by the Germans, today referred to as Trinity Sunday. The cathedral, however, remained unscathed. After World War II, the city expanded into suburbia, as many of its residents began to commute to the city of London. The establishment of the University of Kent also helped spur this growth and development. There was a great expansion of suburban housing around the city. This brings us to the end of our expedition into the history of the city of Canterbury. It's quite a long history with lots of looting, ransacking, burning. The prominent feature of the city, which is the cathedral. And of course the city is quite prominent in the region, being the main city for Herne Bay and Whitstable.